Clean Tech, Sustainability Metrics, Where Do You Stand? Features speakers Robert Bunger, Program Director, CTO Office for Schneider Electric, and Robert D. Wilson, Technology Enterprise Architect, Senior Director at Johnson & Johnson. Please welcome them both.
Yeah, hi. My name is Rob Bunger. Hopefully everybody can hear me well. I am with Schneider Electric. I've been with Schneider Electric for 24 years now, and I work in the CTO office and specifically focused on the data center industry. And we're always looking into the future on how, to make data centers more effective, more efficient, and most importantly, more sustainable. And so that's been my focus over the past few years, and specifically looking at some of the sustainability metrics. And so that's my background. I'll turn it over to Rob Wilson.
Thanks, Rob. Another Rob here, Rob Wilson. I've been at J&J for 16 years. My role is Chief Architect for Supply Chain Technology at J&J. My passion for sustainability and all things environmental has been out there for quite a while. I live into the mantra of think globally and act locally, part of a number of different boards locally, including one at J&J, where I lead the sustainability group at our local site. And been trying over the last little while to see how we can introduce sustainability into my IT job. So, Rob, let me ask you, clean, sustainable technology design is part of corporate social responsibility. So how does that show up for you at Schneider Electric?
Yeah, so Schneider's been heavily involved in sustainability overall. And when we look specifically at data centers, which is, the part that I'm involved with, when you look at ESG, environmental, social, and governance, we're specifically looking at the environmental aspect of data centers. And, last year, we took a look at data centers, and there's been a lot of claims, I think, that many of you probably heard on, some of the internet giants are doing, right, between Microsoft and Meta and Amazon and Google on their sustainability initiatives. And it's obviously not just for them, but everybody is now, from all the hosting providers, looking at what we can do to improve the overall sustainability of data centers. Now, my focus is mainly on the facility side of the data center, not as much on the IT side, but a body of work that we did throughout 2021 was take a look at what do we need to measure. Historically, anybody that's been involved in the data center facility is probably familiar with a metric called PUE, which is power usage effectiveness. And it kind of measures use the word efficiency of the facility, what that overhead is of the facility over the IT. But that's really not enough when you talk about the sustainability of the data center. And so we really took a look at, hey, what are all the things we should be looking at the data center? And we looked at basically energy, carbon, water, waste, and then the land and biodiversity were kind of the categories that we looked at. And we produced a white paper on this. So that's kind of what I've been doing the past year.
So maybe you could dive into that white paper a little bit. Were there any specific action items or findings that were of significance?
Yeah. So for data center facilities, the main focus of recent has been we'll call it Scope 2 carbon. And so that Scope 2 carbon is the carbon that's emitted from the purchase of your electricity. And so if, large data center operators, electricity is one of their biggest operating expenses that they have. And again, one of the larger portions of carbon. Now that's actually starting to get, a lot of the large operators are already purchasing, through PPAs or other things, renewable energy. even funding to put new renewable energy onto the grid, which then they can purchase towards the data center. But one of the next areas to tackle is what we call Scope 3 carbon. And Scope 3 is the embedded carbon in all the stuff that you buy, which can now be one of the largest parts of your emissions. So, the concrete that goes into your facility, or the carbon that's embedded into the metal of the switch gear, or obviously the IT equipment that you use. And so that's where I think the industry as a whole is putting a lot of effort to get transparency to the embedded carbon of all the things that we use and their life cycle carbon.
Maybe the last in this little set of questions here, Rob, is how have you seen this change over time, and where do you think this is going a few years from now?
Yeah, so looking at, we'll talk about things in the news, right? So obviously the carbon in the news, Scope 2, Scope 3, and water usage for data centers. So water, cooling your data center can sometimes, depending on your cooling system, use quite a bit of water. And as we've seen with climate change, new areas are becoming water stressed. And so to use water, evaporative water to reduce your energy is sometimes no longer acceptable, because now you're looking at the local community and affecting them. So really, I think what we're going to see in the future is, everyone's going to be looking at all the different sustainability metrics, looking at what the biggest one is to go tackle that. That's going to become a lower one, just like a Pareto chart. And then you're going to tackle the next one, whether it's going to be Scope 2 carbon, and Scope 3 and water, and then maybe the waste and things like that. So I think you're going to see people continuing to make huge improvements over the next coming years.
Well, that's great. Yeah, I'll share just a little bit about what we're doing at J&J as well, and not so much in the data center area, not because it isn't a great place, but I'm not particularly qualified to describe that. So maybe I can complement your data center progress with some of the stuff we're thinking about at J&J outside, in IT outside of the data center. So if you're familiar with J&J, we're very going after sustainability in a very concerted way. We've got a chief sustainability officer, reports into the head of supply chain. We've, I think, just committed to being carbon-free or carbon neutral, rather, in North America by 2023. I think overall carbon neutral around the world, perhaps by 2030. And a lot of metrics that are reported on company-wide in terms of water usage and all of those things. So we've done IT work in support of some of those initiatives. What we haven't necessarily done a lot of is looking internally at how we can do IT. So the data center you mentioned is an area. I think in general, our approach there is to move to the cloud as aggressively as we can, thinking that whatever we can do locally in our data centers will be dwarfed by what would happen with economies of scale and incentives they had at these global cloud providers. So that's one area, but there's a number of different areas also. You mentioned ESG when you started your comments. That's an area where I think we can do better in reporting. Of course, we're in IT. We all spend a ton of time thinking about data. I think ESG or environmental, social, and governance is an area we see getting more and more prominence. And I've even saw large providers. I deal a lot with SAP. I noticed they're developing an SAP module on ESG, which is, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but certainly it's a popular thing or becoming more popular. And I think we could help internally. I'll quickly go through some others that are on this list, and maybe I'll talk more in depth, but we're leaning in a little bit to AR and VR. So when you've got virtual reality, we did this over the period of COVID. You were able to train people. Yes, there's this thing called I see what you see, or you see what I see. You get a tech with a headset on. You get actually a non-tech with a headset on. They're streaming a machine and what's going on, and you have a tech who's located in another facility who can guide you with very detailed instructions. So that was exciting. I talked about the facility in terms of the cloud and data centers, but we also have lots of plants, as I'm sure many of you do in the audience. And we are looking at ways to, using IoT and sensors, make sure we do a better job of optimizing efficiency in the plant. Lights go off when people aren't in that room. Temperatures go down when you're not at that room. You're probably doing a lot of this in your own home, actually. You just take that and scale it up to the level of a plant, distribution center, or one of our offices, one of our empty offices these days. And hopefully we don't spend money on things we don't need to. And maybe just one last thing, 3D printing is another area where I think the sustainability angle there is you don't have excess inventory, or you would tend to have less excess inventory. If you build excess, of course, that's waste, that's resources you don't need to expend. And then transportation. If you're building something on site, you don't have to transport it anywhere. So lots of ways to think about sustainability, but I'll stop there.
Something that you mentioned rang a note with us. So you meant like AR, VR, but then AI and machine learning. And so when you look at something as simple, and I'll talk about, I have a smart thermostat at my house, right? So great. It can maybe sense when I'm here. You can schedule it. If you imagine the progression that thermostats have made over the years, from the circular dial that's set and never changes, to manual scheduling it, to now online or adaptively scheduling it, knows when you're coming home, to now, I'm with a program with my utility. So if the utility strain, they'll pay me to be able to turn off my air conditioners for a period of time on that really hot day, or lower the thermostat. And so that's a program. So you now imagine, not only data centers, buildings doing the exact same thing, where the IT systems, which I think all of you support, are now enabling sustainable operation of buildings and data centers. Everything's going to become more smart and adaptive. And so as we look to the future of data centers, we're definitely looking at how do you make it more automated, more adaptive, both from adaptive of using electricity, adaptive of using water, for the climate that you're in.
Yeah, I think that electricity use is an area that deserves a little bit more exploration too. I'm sure we're all familiar at home with our PCs that first the screen will go off, then it will go into quiet mode, and eventually it'll shut off. And we've got all these monitors around all of our buildings that do that, and all this other equipment that does it as well. I've begun to see a little bit more with the use of applications and how much energy they use. And that, I think there's some marginal benefit there. The one I am sort of on a one-man crusade back at J&J is to really be careful about blockchain. So you've all read the scary stories about blockchain. Every time someone wants to go into a blockchain thing, I don't say no, but I just really want to make sure that we've got a good use case for it, especially while we're still in this proof of work phase of blockchain, where you have to do data mining to get these the next block. I think that's really something, if you've got any environmental sensibility at all, and I don't care where the energy is coming from, whether it's wind or a waterfall or whatever, it's still a profligate use of energy. So there is this hope that we'll get to proof of stake with things like homomorphic encryption and some other things, but I haven't seen any imminent there. I just had an interesting conversation with one of the Deloitte futurists, and they were talking about that, but
yeah,
not the only area, but just an area of electricity to watch out for.
Yeah. Now, Rob, you had mentioned J&J's sustainability goals, which are actually very aggressive, but I think most people admit it is needed. What would you say some of the top things the company's looking at in order to tackle that to meet those goals?
Yeah, most of them will not be IT related. There are some things that are IT enabled. So the top goals are going to be reduced water usage. I think you mentioned that as well. So we'll try to reduce water usage, especially in our manufacturing processes. We've got about 120 plants around the world that use a lot of water. Reduce electricity in those plants. That's another one. I mentioned some of those simple ways where you can just make sure the lights go off and the temperature is at the right setting, and we're efficient with our use of electricity. We've put a lot of solar panels on our buildings. We've created solar farms in front. If you're in our New Jersey area, you'll drive by and you'll see some solar farms in front of our buildings. So it's there's no one thing really. I'm sure, as you know, Rob, we're trying to attack this on multiple fronts. Yeah. And in the product itself, which I'm not that close to, but you'll see less packaging in some of our products, smaller bottle cap sizes for some of our shampoos and other consumer products. So it really is sort of a multifaceted approach. How about at Schneider? How do you guys attack this?
Yeah, same. So we're looking at, we kind of look at it two things. One, to make sure we're operationally carbon free, and that's a short timeline, I think, similar years, and then overall carbon free, and that takes account, hey, when I go take a flight for a business trip, how is that offset, right? I mean, those are the things that you have to start thinking about. But again, I think we're all flying a lot less now, and we can see that in our future. We're able to do this type of thing right here, right? Which is great. But and also trying to help our customers, be more efficient, and so almost downstream carbon. But you can imagine, it's funny when you think of her journey, back at the turn of the century in 2020, we had our company, we purchased a company that had a very, very efficient UPS product, the silicon product. And so we went out to go sell this thing because it was highly efficient, and really nobody cared. They're like, hey, is it reliable? That's all I care about. They really didn't care about efficiency. And so now fast forward 20 years later, finally, everybody actually cares. When we are doing a lot of work looking at all our suppliers and going upstream to make sure that, all of our factories will be running on renewable energy, right? And the materials, subsystems that we purchase have reduced carbon. So it's a lot of work, but, I think like you guys, we have a lot of people focused on it.
Yeah, Rob, we've got a question or two I'll get to. One thing I wanted to throw out there is one of my pet projects. Maybe the assembled audience can help think about there too. And your comment triggered that. You're looking at, when we book an airplane flight now, you can see that this flight is 25% less carbon than the flight below it, or minus or plus. They've talked about doing that in products on the shelf. I would love to be able to do that with our IT projects as well. This project has a net positive or negative to sustainability or carbon. Yeah. I think that would be really cool. I don't know exactly how to do it, but I think it would be great if we could do it.
And I think we're going to get there. There's going to be a lot of transparency. Every time you buy something, you're going to know how much carbon's in there, and you're going to, start looking not only at price, but you'll be looking at carbon as a metric to purchase things. And the first question I see here from the audience is, what's the magnitude of cost savings of sustainability programs are you seeing, and how immediate can the cost savings be recognized? So, it depends on where you are. In some places where there is a carbon tax, there's that comes into just the economic calculus of the whole thing. Now, generally, energy is usually the first thing that people look at. And in general, when you put in efficiency programs, you can always weigh the ROI on it. So it depends. Some of these are really long-term payback. Some you might get lucky and it'd be very, very quick.
Yeah, we definitely look at this. I was just talking to our chief sustainability officer the other day. I mentioned all the solar we have, but we don't put it up willy-nilly. My very building, in fact, we were thinking about putting solar up, and the calculus didn't work out. So unfortunately, we will not be getting it. But generally speaking, we do. I think she's also beginning to consider externalized costs too. So not necessarily the focus cost of that particular project, but what's the cost to the community? What's the cost to longer term cost to the people who might be driving there, for example. So the company may not bear it directly, but you may see other costs. So we're trying to consider that broadly. And speaking of community, I'll ask you the second one, which talks about, we hear a lot about DEI and human rights in part of sustainability. In fact, it's part of that ESG
That's
reporting.
right.
So I wondered, how that shows up at Schneider.
Yeah, so my expertise is more on the environmental part, but when you look at the United Nations, program for sustainability, obviously those are a big part on how you're supporting your local community, human rights, and all that other stuff. And so we do have, I think a corporate scorecard on how we do on that to try to be as transparent as possible. So it's good because, environmental sustainability is pretty straightforward for me, but what's long-term sustainable for the planet includes all these other things on how you're doing from a human rights perspective and everything else. So that's a good question. The question 3 actually is I might talk to a little bit. The workload shifting that the big folks they are looking at that, and even more interestingly, they're looking at how they do hour by hour matching of renewable energy production to data center use. So that's one of the metrics that we identified for advanced folks is, one, you can purchase, on an annual basis, renewable energy and make sure that annually you're covered, but on an hour by hour basis, are you able to match that? And they're really looking to try to do that. And some of that might be able to be done by shifting some workloads globally so that you can actually shift the load to where the renewable energy is. It's still a little bit advanced, but that's definitely being talked about.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
There's an audience question, but it looks more like someone's educating me, which I certainly appreciate. Calling me dated, which I do not deny. But good to know that there's just some update for the rest of the audience that there's some opportunities here in blockchain that aren't so pessimistic as I was with something like Ripple, HBAR, and VET. So where energy consumption is extremely low. So I guess maybe I'll just revise my statement that if you are looking at blockchain, just make sure to also consider the energy. And if it is one of these more modern approaches to operating a blockchain, then you'll have less of a sustainability concern. So thank you for that.
Yeah. The only other interesting thing with regards to blockchain that I've heard is when there is excess energy on the grid, like renewables and stuff, sometimes we'll call it less critical load, bulk load, like blockchain mining could be a grid stabilization benefit potentially. I don't think we're there yet, but that's an interesting concept.
Great, Rob. I think we're about to wrap up. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, no, all I can say is, want to appreciate everybody's time here. But I think if you're looking at sustainability towards your IT, we always recommend, start measuring. That's the first thing you can do to understand, what's the most important thing that you want to tackle first.
Great. Yeah. And coming from a data world, I would say you mentioned AI and MLs. So that's a great place to start as well, not just for measuring, but for getting insights and trying to figure out what's out there, what opportunities are out there. So Rob, thank you very much. Looks like our time's come to an end.
Yeah,
great to learn more about Schneider.
Yeah, great to talk with you.
You got it. Good luck, folks.